Hey everybody, it's Robert coming to you with another adventure into history. I'm out here with Dan and we're at an amazing old family cemetery today that you're related to these folks out here.
Distantly, yes.
And this was established about 1855, but this one is unusual for us to see because it is extremely well kept, and we're going to give you the history of it.
Well, we're on the outskirts of Waverly Hall in Talbot County, and we're here today with Joy Kersey Fisher. Joy is a descendant of the family that's buried here, and Joy has done something that we have a lot of questions about. We have a lot of people to question, why doesn't a family care for that cemetery? Or why doesn't a family go out there and fix up that cemetery? Well, Joy has done that. Now, this cemetery was pretty well kept over the years, but Joy has really outdone herself in spearheading a project here. She, after her mother passed away, her mother, her father, her brother, and for generations back, they're buried in this little cemetery here behind their home place, which is right down here. That's the old Storey McDaniel family home. Well, Joy took over the project of fixing this cemetery up, and it's a model for everyone else to follow. For anyone that wants to do something like this is a great example.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over to Joy.
Yeah, so this is family land. My grandparents grew up here in the house, and we grew up running around this property, playing in this cemetery all the time as kids, which was, in hindsight, quite an unusual thing to get to do. So it's definitely very special to our family, and it was always maintained pretty well, but now my grandparents are passed away and they're buried here. My third great grandparents are the ones who originally built the home place around by 1856, and so multiple generations of our family are here, and a lot of these graves were covered. You can see the old stones from the 1800s where there's no markings. We don't exactly know who's who. We know there's a lot of children, a lot of babies that didn't make it, and these stones were all placed there by the people who did know who they were and cared for them, and so that was very important to us when I was doing this project, to maintain that and not lose anything about those stones. And then sometime in the 1920s, someone finally had a little bit of money and marked some of the graves more clearly, but they were handwritten names and dates and that kind of thing. So as a child, I probably could have read them all, but now a lot of it has been lost to time. We have worked to mark every grave that we know exactly who is there, and otherwise we created a monument to at least name everyone who's in here, even if we don't exactly know where they are.
And so that's one thing that I'm really impressed with, because you do have all of like the children here that are just in unmarked graves, marked only with field stones, like we see so much in these old cemeteries, and have no idea who it is, but you've got some of their names over here. We'll take a look at this incredible monument.
These stones, I will note, they're so low to the ground you would trip on them most of the time and almost not realize you were standing on a grave. So what we found is the rocks are really sturdy, and when we pulled them up so that the gravel wouldn't cover them, now it really feels like a full cemetery. You really kind of appreciate how many losses there actually were. But since we don't know who is who exactly, we've kind of created this memorial to name everybody that we know is here, and just researching using censuses. Don't quite have full dates a lot of times, but you know that you had a 3-year-old in 1850 or 1840, and then they're nowhere to be found on the 1850 census. They've probably not made it. So the original owners of the land, William and Sarah, William died in 1873. His wife actually lived to be around 100, pretty close to 100, if not a little over. So she was here until 1920, and that's when some of these graves got kind of updated. And then she has 2 daughters, Molly and Sarah over there, who are buried in here as well. And Sarah would be my second great grandmother.
Yeah, so how are you related to?
So So William Storey, actually his father is buried across the street somewhere, down the street. Jesse Storey would have been my 4th great-grandfather. So William and Sarah would have been my 3rd great-grandparents. And then my 2nd great-grandparents would have been their daughter Sarah, who married a McDaniel. And Anderson was how the McDaniels came into the property. And then my great-grandparents, we called her Ma, but Fanny, Eugenia, and William Wesley. And then the McDaniels were Scottish, they were clan-like, and so when he died, Ma married his brother, and he was kind of the father figure to my grandfather, and these are my grandparents, George McDaniel and Louise McDaniel, and they're buried on the new portion. And then my parents are buried here as well. So, and then my brother is also here, so he and I were the third great-grandchildren of the original owners.
Awesome. And I see on here it says this memorial was placed in 2022 AD, 182 years after our ancestors William G. Storey and Sarah Elizabeth Carter Storey first came to Talbot County. I love that. But tell me about, so William G. Storey and Sarah Elizabeth Storey were the first Storeys here?
Actually, their father, and Dan would know a little bit more about this, was Richard Storey here in Talbot County. So
Richard Storey was actually over in Warren County here.
In Warren County. A lot of them sort of meandered through as the Indians were removed and new land opened up. So Talbot County, I think, was formed in like 1827, I want to say, right around there. So at some point during that time, Jesse made it here. William's father made it here to Talbot County. But since we don't 100% know exactly what year this land was in the family, it made more sense to say Talbot County than.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's
But
great.
we do know that the property was in the family by 1856.
And it still is, which is
And
awesome.
It still is. Yep,
That's
it still
awesome.
is. So, and we definitely, each generation has a different sort of type of memory. Like I grew up doing Easter egg hunts on the property. There were cows and horses, so we would pull the Easter eggs out of the manure because my aunts and uncles thought that was funny. And you know, now my kids, we have a fire pit on the property and we'll hang out at Thanksgiving, and you know, just we all have memories here, even though they kind of have morphed and changed as we have been able to use the house and not been able to use the house and whatnot. So
That's great. Well, let's take a look at some of these.
This Molly Storey was also a daughter of William and Sarah, and her husband was a Confederate soldier, and he was part of the Allens of Rough Edge, which is another area of Talbot County. And then his daughter is buried here as well. And these brick and concrete graves are all poured around, like he died in 1917, so somewhere 1915 to 1920s they were all poured. And then my grandparents are here, and my parents and brother, and these are obviously much newer than the rest of the cemetery. So, and then just at Thanksgiving we had I had all this gravel and stuff put in for maintenance because
Awesome.
I don't live here full time, and so upkeep is obviously a very real problem when you can't be there all the time. So took out some trees, and the idea is that hopefully as time goes on it'll be a lot easier to care for it amongst all the different cousins who live all around. So
Absolutely. And one thing I wanted to point out is I see what you were talking about with the, and it might be kind of hard to make out on camera. See if I can get the.
you can kind of see the A-L-L-E, you know, it's like somebody's handwriting, it's kind of going at an angle, and you can see it's July, there's the J, and then the 4, July 4th, 1919 or 17, I guess.
Yeah, that's great.
I had to coordinate like what we thought we could read to what research tells us about exactly when death certificates didn't come around till when, what, 1920? 23. So like she has a death certificate. It's very easy to help us. His is harder. Hers, I have no idea when she died. I just know it was before him. So we've left some, space to potentially add a date, add a death date if I can ever deduce that information.
Right.
Researching, and you can kind of see the M, the Molly. And I remember reading these as kids. This older section here, those are harder. That's probably Anderson and Sarah Storey, but don't know which is which. That's probably Sarah Carter Storey, who lived to be almost 100. Her husband, the original William Storey, died in 1873, so he didn't really get a good marking. But her lone grave up there, that's why we kind of assume that's what's happening over there.
Right, for sure. And there are, as you were pointing out earlier before we started filming, a couple of field stones marking potential graves right here.
I think so, yeah. This seems to be laid out originally west to east, which was common. And most of them, there's headstones and footstones. It's unlikely that this is a head and foot stone going in the opposite direction, so probably that's
right.
another two graves there.
And so I saw this marker was, obviously it's got a new marker that you've put on here, but I thought that one was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was a neat one. This was the other thing I had them do was clean these graves, because sap and they were covered in black. You actually could no longer read his grave, and you kind of can notice that the birth dates are different, birth years. But the thing is, his I think it was one of his draft cards or some card. I guess it wouldn't be. Yeah, I think it was his World War I draft card. Has his birth date listed properly. So I think they were just kind of guessing.
Right.
They knew he was born around 1880, 1881, and they just guessed. But the documentation I have says he was born in 1880, so that's what I went with when I added the new one.
Then over here, this is that's a cool way they poured that concrete.
I have no idea why it looks like that.
Yeah,
What do you think, Dan? Is there a reason for it?
I don't think there's any particular reason. It's just
It seems like,
formed up that way.
I know, if concrete was sort of, I don't know how affordable it was.
Yeah.
It's a different type. This is that pea gravel concrete, it looks like, whereas the other ones don't have. And these that are written on are brick with the concrete poured on top. And this one looks like and I would guess with the rocks you can see in the side, that looks like it was just one big concrete form.
Those folks were buried around 1920, a little bit earlier. And they have that similar style, and then you can kind of see that these have it. And like even hers, instead of being handwritten, you can just barely tell that Josie is a stamp.
Yeah, sure enough.
Stamp. So, but then she died in the 1850s.
These two.
And these were more 1840s. So, I think that has something to do with the different materials.
Yeah, for sure. Until you pointed it out, I didn't even see that stamping in there, but that's cool.
I had somebody asking me, because they were like, why are there all these flat, they didn't understand. They were like, why is there a bunch of plywood laying in your, and I was like, that's not plywood, that's the graves. But I guess, do most cemeteries not do the big
Slabs.
bed?
Yeah.
They do the pillows, but not the bed? I don't know. I don't know
Honestly,
why it's like that.
back when these graves were done, there's a good possibility that is the top of a hand-built vault. Mr. O.C. Wilson in Talbot used to build vaults for families around here, and he built them out of brick. He built my grandfather's in 1942, and he started out, I'm told, that he built it from the ground up. He lined the grave with brick, and he came up, and then he did an arch over the casket, and then he sealed off the top with brick just like this, and then he poured concrete around that. And my grandfather's grave in the Talbot Cemetery looks very much like that one. So that was done as a foundation to put a large ledger slab on. And see, these never had ledger slabs. They left them just like this.
Right. And so the brick, do you think those are the vault?
I would say most likely those are the tops of the vault. There's no dirt on the caskets. Those are the actual tops.
Interesting. I had no idea.
There's a possibility that one right there, the reason it's done a little bit different, they were probably told, that he's entitled to a Woodman of the World Memorial, and you need to have a good foundation for it. And that may be why they poured that, because, you know, they didn't know what the marker would look like. I think Woodman of the World gave you like 6 choices, and that's what they chose. They would send you different stages of a tree, you know, the stump, the full trunk, or one like that. And in some cases, I think ours over at Talbot has got a slab, you know, a ledger with the logo of Woodman of the World up at the top. But that was a very nice marker, not for 1939 there. And but that's likely why that's built the way that it is.
I'd always wondered why. So William Storey died in 1870, and those stacked rock pioneer graves, I kind of thought there would be one for him like that here,
Yeah.
rather than just nothing, you know, where we don't know.
I think by 1870 that had gone out of style here. I don't know why, but it did.
Yeah,
I don't think we've seen one after 1865, 66 maybe.
Yeah. No, they seem to be very most common, like, you know, 1830s to 50s,
Oh,
I would say.
interesting.
And then they went out of style.
I know that one of those divining people has come through here. I haven't seen the paperwork, my uncle has it, but to try to figure out, like, you can tell, theoretically, you can tell male and female. So I need to pull that out, but that might help us figure out, like,
Really?
have you ever heard that? It's almost like well water. It's a thing.
Really?
It's
Okay.
a thing. I don't know what the science is of
Male
it.
skeleton versus female skeleton.
I know,
Okay.
right?
You're going to edit this, right?
I'm leaving this in.
No,
Because your
seriously.
face was funny.
Like, it is so, it sounds like it's pulling your leg, but there are some people who, like, swear by it.
No,
Swear by it. They can do it with coat hangers, and anybody can do it. And
Yeah.
you know, you test it over the graves that you know, so you can
Yeah.
say, oh, is it getting it right? And then the accuracy is like 80 to 90%.
I have seen that. I actually had someone who I talked to a long time ago who owned a cemetery, had relatives buried at a cemetery I went to. He did the divining rods and said that when it would like cross over if it was male or
In one
then
direction
open.
if it's a female or something.
And then they
That's interesting.
They've
swore
had it
by
done.
it.
I just haven't seen the outcome of it. Now that we know actually a little bit more, we could kind of match it up and say, okay,
I would like to.
is that why? Is it a different? The X chromosome in the sand creates a different. I mean, truly, you think about it, like the soil makeup is now different in this, like where the graves are versus, you know,
That's
because
true.
there's like different compounds. And
But for the rest of it, I loved your face, Dan. I have to say when she said that.
Oh, I got to admit, I've never heard that.
You've
I have,
never heard
no,
that.
I've
You
heard,
are in the business of hearing that
well,
kind of story all the time.
I've heard of finding unmarked graves that way. I
Oh.
really have, but I've never heard of
The
male, female.
Yeah.
no,
This is
it's a
yeah.
This is a guy buried here.
it's a real thing.
They
I
say-
promise you.
They say that they
Oh.
can do it. So I wanted to get close up of the Woodman of the World Memorial here. It's Wade McDaniel, 1907 to 1939. And interestingly enough, this stone is cracked. We were looking at that earlier too. It's been repaired at some point, and it is talking about how it would have happened. This is a big, thick stone. And just for interest's sake, if you watch my other channel where I work on my old farm, which used to be owned by the Birds, there's a bird here. Don't know if that's any relation to my old birdhouse or not, but interesting to note.
So this is the home place house, the Storey McDaniel home that we think was probably built around 1856. It's talked about in the Rockaway and Talbot books a little bit, and there in the 1940s there was a dairy on the property. So around you can kind of find tin roofs from old hog pens, and there's a well. My grandmother was on well water, really probably almost until like 2000 or so. Then she was on city water. I don't exactly, maybe it was the 1990s when she went on city water, but anyway, the well's still there. It still has water if we wanted to use it, but I think some rodents may have died in there, who knows. Yeah, so every so often you can find like a milk can or whatever. We didn't have like our own dairy name. They sold it, I think, to Wells Dairy.
Oh well, yeah.
Dan probably knows about that, but yeah, so yeah. So, and it was originally, we think it was maybe a dog trot style. We've been trying to sort of deduce what rooms are original versus what rooms were added on. My mother told me that they didn't have a bathroom in the house until she was in high school. So that would have been around 1955, which blew my mind.
Right.
So this little sort of shed down here was on the side of an original like wooden external kitchen. You know, they would separate those from the main house, so if there was a fire, hopefully the original house wouldn't burn. And yeah, it's got that kind of giant hallway we played in as kids. That is a breezeway that's been closed in over time. My grandfather was, I guess, a pretty fantastic carpenter in the area, and so a lot of it's a little bit hard to tell what's new and what's old, but